evolving a wing would be macroevolution. Okay, so that's the difference. Macroevolution is a major change in a step between one life form to another. So I just thought I'd clarify that real quickly. I'll get into that more later on. Now, we talked about the idea of the old earth, where it came from, what it led to. And so what I want to step into next is the question, has there been a global flood? This is key, because all of the evidence Lyell talked about is thrown out the window if there has been a global flood. He worked overtime. He spent his whole life trying to discredit the idea of a global flood. I'm now going to disqualify everything he did in less than an hour. You can time me on this, okay? The evidence for a global flood is absolutely overwhelming. But first we need to ask ourselves the question, what would we be looking for? First we need to ask the question, what would we be looking for if there had been a global flood? That's a key question. How many people have heard of the idea, it was promoted by National Geographic and Discover TV? Oh, okay, Dr. Floyd has. The Black Sea flood. And that Noah's flood wasn't really a global flood, it was just the Black Sea went over its shorelines. How many have heard of that? Okay, a grand total of 6, okay. Well, at least someone was watching Discovery Channel. Anyway, let's lay that nonsense to rest right now. Why on earth would anybody suggest this? Think about this for a second. Who is going to build a 450-foot long ship, take 120 years to build it, collect 2 of every animal when all he had to do was go to the nearest mountain? It makes absolutely no sense, unless you don't want to believe the scriptures and the scriptural account, which says it was a global flood. The Black Sea flood is absolute nonsense. Here is what the Bible says. It says, number 1, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Get this, the ark did not float until the 40th day. If you're dealing with skeptics, antagonists, and anti-creationists, they will often play up the global flood as happening overnight. For example, they'll argue that dinosaur egg nests refute the flood, because after all, how can a dinosaur be laying an egg nest on the bottom of an ocean in the middle of a raging flood? That's a non sequitur. They've jumped to conclusions that do not exist, okay? I'm going to come back to that. Notice the ark floated on the 40th day, so the water didn't cover the land overnight. It actually took 5 months. The Bible is quite clear on this. It took 150 days before it finally covered the highest mountain. And this is key. All the mountains under all the heavens were covered by at least 15 cubits. How many mountains? All. Not 1 or 2. Every single one of them. Every single one of them under all the heavens were covered by water at least 15 cubits. That's what the Bible says. It says everything on the face of the earth that breathed the breath of life, was killed. How much? Everything. Not just a few things, everything. This was a global flood. This was not some local flood, as some have tried to explain it away as. 150 days later, the water receded off the land. That's key. All this is key for geology, all key for how life then reproduced after the flood, etc. Okay, now this is what this would mean. We would see layering. Right now, our oceans go up and down twice a day, anywhere between 3 and 5 feet. Why? Tides. Are we going to have tides during a global flood? Of course. If anything, they're going to be more dramatic. Even if they only double in size, that's still a 6 to 10 foot tide. That's a pretty big wave. Has anybody tried to go swimming in a 6 to 10 foot high wave? It's pretty powerful. You'll get fossil sorting. For instance, dinosaurs typically can be expected to outrun a clam. Typically. Sea life is going to be buried first. Why? They're in the water. They're already there. They're going to be what's buried first. Humans, being very intelligent, are going to do everything from grab onto floating things to swimming to whatever. Humans will be expected to be buried last, most likely. Mammals, when they drown, tend to bloat and float. So they will tend to either disintegrate or be buried last. Okay, so there's going to be a fossil sorting just by the very nature of the flood. Billions of dead things are going to be buried all over the world in these layers as they're being laid down. Now, here's our fancy high-tech mountain that I drew in Windows Paint. There's the mountain, and there's the pre-flood ocean, okay? Now, the flood starts going on. Water comes up on the land, a wave washes in some sediments, makes a layer. Low tide, water goes back out. Next tide comes in, washes in another layer. Low tide, it goes out. Next wave comes in, washes in another layer, low tide goes out. Perhaps dinosaurs walk out on the floodplain looking for food, possibly trying to look for higher ground, trying to escape. During this time, they've been carrying eggs literally for weeks. They have to do something with them. Either they have to lay a nest or ditch the eggs, so they do one of both. Next wave comes in. Now, this is key. You remember that horrible Indonesian tsunami that happened a couple of years ago, just after Christmas? We learned a lot of things from that tsunami. We learned that one wave can actually form 3 to 5 layers from one wave. The assumption in the past has been one wave creates one layer. That's been the assumption. We've now found that that's just plain not true. One wave can lay down multiple layers. Suddenly, we have a mechanism for laying down our rock record. Very simple. Now, when we take a look at rock layers today, again, we're taught, this layers probably took thousands to millions of years. These layers probably took millions of years. These ones probably took millions of years, okay? Now, all these layers were first originally interpreted by a creationist, guy by the name of Nicholas Steno. Also known as Niels Stenson, that was his Dutch name. He Latinized it into Nicholas Steno, also spelt as Nicolaus Stenonis. Now, Nicholas Steno was an incredibly brilliant man. He was actually an anatomist. And some fishermen nearby actually caught a large shark, and they brought it to Steno because they knew he was interested in anatomy. He immediately recognized the teeth of the shark, because on the mountains near where he was, there had been all these strange-shaped rocks that they called tungstones. He immediately recognized the teeth of the sharks and said, "These are fossil teeth. What are they doing up in the mountains?" Well, the conclusion was obvious. Noah's flood. He had no problems with that. However, later on, through a rather bizarre conversion to Catholicism, after that, his views changed. And sadly, he actually died. They actually made him a bishop because he was such a smart and well-known man. And he was so impressed by the Catholics, basically, what's the word I'm looking for, where they punish themselves, penance and whatnot. He would fast repeatedly and actually killed himself as a result of this. He was very young when he died, incredibly brilliant man, but sadly wound up killing himself. Now, the 4 principles of stratigraphy, or strata, the study of rock layers, were developed by Nicholas Steno, and they're still held today. The original principle of superposition. In other words, the lower layers were laid first, and as you go up, these layers were laid last, as you go up in the layers. The principle of original horizontality. All the layers, no matter how they are today, whether they're buckled, folded, tilted, were originally horizontal when they were laid down. The principle of lateral continuity. Because they were horizontal and produced by water, those layers continue until they met something like a mountain or a hill, in which case they only encroached up to it, and so the layer will continue as far as it can until it reaches higher ground. And finally, the principle of cross-cutting discontinuities. Big technical words, don't worry about it. It just means if we see a river channel, the layer was laid down first, the river channel was made last, okay? That's the bottom line. Or if we find rocks that have fallen down into it, the layer was made first, everything last. But you'll notice something changed. Originally, in Nicholas Steno's original reports, he did not cite the principle of superposition. Instead, he suggested that the layer was laid down, multiple layers were laid down, by different densities of sediments. In other words, a wash of water could come in. What he's saying is a wash of water could come in and make multiple layers. He said that hundreds of years ago, long before the tsunami in Indonesia. And he said that originally, yet later on he recanted and came up with the principle of superposition, which many now call the law of superposition, which is not a law because it's been falsified. It's not true. We now know one wave can make multiple layers. And I'm going to show you, probably within the hour, some experiments I carried out in which we made them right before your very eyes. Dead easy. Anybody can do it at home. Okay, let's take a look at those layers again. Here's a key thing, and this is something that Steno noticed. Here's layers A. There's a group of them. There's a really thick layer, I'll call B. There's a group of layers I'll call C. There's a thicker layer I'll call D. This is in not far from Kodachrome Basin in Utah. Let's back up a little. Notice the C layer actually thins out into just a few smaller layers. B layer actually thickens here. A stays the same, D stays the same. Let's back out a little more. Notice that C actually becomes almost nothing. It thickens out into a bunch of thicker layers and then thins out again. So if we were to take a look at a rock core or something here, the conventional interpretation is that these rock layers took millions of years. No, they didn't. Obviously, they were laid at the same time these ones were. So all these layers did not take millions of years. They happened at the same time. This is actually, a technical term for this is called interbedding, and it happens all over the place. You can actually see interbedding like this that can literally go on for 100 miles or more. And so if you're in the middle somewhere, you look at these rock layers, a conventional geologist will look at those and say, well, this one's older, this one is older than this one. No, they were laid at the same time. Do you see what I'm getting at here? The principle of superposition doesn't work. It's been falsified. Now let's come back to the Temple of Serapis. Lyell is correct, the land sunk. However, his idea that a local flood can produce the layers around the world is nonsense. It doesn't work. Here's why. Here's what Lyell did not know. So explain to me how you are going to cover almost 1/2 of North America in an underwater ocean floor mud flow moving 90 miles an hour without a global flood.